All right, so today we're going deep
Yeah.
into some pretty intense stuff, to be honest.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at a recent interview with Russia's foreign minister, Sergey Lavrov.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and this one's packed.
It is.
Full of some pretty thought-provoking, even unsettling stuff.
Right.
It's a long interview.
Yes.
So we're going to be looking at some excerpts
Okay.
from it. And
Good.
yeah, we're going to go through everything from, like, conditions for peace in Ukraine to, like, the state of U.S.-Russia relations.
Right.
I mean, Lavrov really doesn't mince words here.
No, he does not.
So we're going to try to break down what he says with you today.
Sounds good.
Stick to the facts as presented in the interview.
Right.
And hopefully help you make sense of this.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack, yeah.
Dense interview, but I
Yeah.
think it's got a lot of really good insights into how Russia views the current geopolitical landscape.
Yeah.
You know, world events.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the first things that Lavrov talks about is what he sees as the path to peace in Ukraine.
Okay.
And he lays out some pretty specific conditions.
Right.
Some might even say demanding conditions.
Yeah.
For peace, he talks about no NATO,
Right.
no military bases or exercises involving foreign troops near Russia.
Okay.
Now, historically, this whole idea of NATO expansion has been
A major
sticking point
for Russia.
for Russia, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, think back to the Cold War.
Yeah.
Russia has always viewed NATO expansion as a direct threat
Right.
to its national security.
Yeah,
And, you know, demanding a rollback, especially now,
is
a huge ask.
Yeah.
One that's unlikely to be met by
Right.
the West.
Absolutely. And he also emphasizes
He does.
the need to consider the quote-unquote realities on the ground,
Yes.
which to me sounds a little bit loaded.
A bit loaded.
So is this possibly a hint at maybe potential territorial concessions?
Okay.
Or is it more of a power play?
Sorry.
You know, like trying to solidify gains?
It's definitely open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so interesting, I think.
Right.
It could be strategic ambiguity.
Right.
You know, leaving some wiggle room
Yeah.
for negotiation.
Right.
But at the same time, asserting strength.
Uh-huh.
It really, you know, it highlights the challenges
Yeah.
in deciphering this diplomatic language.
Yeah.
Every single word is so carefully
Yeah.
chosen.
Carefully chosen. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And then there's this claim that,
Yes.
you know, the sanctions that were intended to cripple Russia
Right.
have actually backfired
Hmm.
and made them stronger.
Okay.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So the thing about sanctions
Yeah.
is that their impact is rarely straightforward.
Okay.
So, you know, of course the intention is to weaken a country,
Right.
economically and politically, but there can be unforeseen consequences. Right. So, for example, some analysts have argued that the sanctions have actually bolstered Russia's domestic arms industry.
Okay, interesting.
Right. They've been forced to become more self-reliant,
Uh-huh.
find workarounds, innovate, and, you know, potentially reducing their dependence on Western technology.
In the long run.
In the long run, exactly. So it's not as simple
Right.
as sanctions equal immediate weakness.
Gotcha. So it's not a simple equation there.
Oh, no.
And speaking of strength and resilience, Lavrov mentions the testing of the Oreshnik system
Okay.
as a signal to the West.
Okay.
So first of all, what is this system and what message do you think
Right.
Russia is trying to send
Okay.
by showcasing it now?
So the Oreshnik, as far as we know, it's a new electronic warfare system.
Okay.
The details are still classified.
Oh, right.
But, you know, Lavrov is really emphasizing its capabilities,
Yeah.
particularly its ability to disrupt communication and surveillance systems.
Uh-huh.
So this is clearly intended to, you know, showcase Russia's technological advancement in a field that's becoming increasingly important
Right.
in modern warfare.
So it's a signal, but he also says that Russia wants to avoid escalation.
Right.
So how do these two seemingly contradictory statements work together?
It's a classic example of deterrence diplomacy.
Okay.
Right. So Russia is flexing its muscles,
Okay.
showing that it has the capacity to respond
Yeah.
if provoked,
Right.
but also emphasizing that they don't actually want a full-blown conflict.
Right.
So it's a very high-stakes balancing act.
Right. Yeah. And it leads us to, I think, the broader picture of U.S.-Russia relations, which Lavrov paints as
Strained, to say the least.
strained, yeah, to say the very least.
Yeah.
He mentions cooperation and dialogue,
Yeah.
but then also warns of the West's role in the conflict and the risks of misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really reflects a deep-seated mistrust between the two sides and just fundamentally different perspectives on global security.
Right.
Lavrov repeatedly points to the West's failure to adhere to the Minsk agreements. As you know, a key factor leading to the current situation.
Right.
And just to remind our listeners, these agreements were meant to bring peace to eastern Ukraine back in 2014, but they ultimately collapsed, with each side blaming the other for violations.
Right. So Lavrov's interpretation of that failure seems to be a cornerstone of the Russian narrative.
It is.
Right. Blaming the West and Ukraine for not upholding their end of the bargain.
Exactly. And they view the West's support for Ukraine, particularly its military aid, as a direct violation of the spirit of the Minsk agreements. They argue that this support emboldened Ukraine and prevented a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the Donbas region.
Right. So it's a lot of placing blame.
It is. A lot of finger pointing.
But amidst all this tension, Lavrov does state very clearly that Russia's goal is to avoid nuclear war.
Right.
So how much weight do you think we should give that statement, given everything else that he said?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
And one that I think we should all take very seriously.
Right.
The potential consequences of nuclear conflict are just too catastrophic to ignore.
Yeah.
And the fact that Lavrov is acknowledging this, even while outlining Russia's grievances and red lines, suggests that there's still a recognition of the need to prevent that ultimate escalation.
Okay.
So I think it's a very important statement.
All right. And finally, there's Lavrov's take on Donald Trump.
Yes.
He seems to view him as a leader he could do business with.
Okay.
But also emphasizes the need to judge by actions and not just words.
Well, Lavrov's a seasoned diplomat. He's seen it all at this point.
He has.
So he's less interested in personal relationships and more focused on tangible outcomes.
Right.
I think his comments on Trump reflect that very pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
You know, recognizing the potential for deal-making, but also maintaining a healthy dose of skepticism.
Right. So this interview was really a whirlwind of like geopolitical maneuvering and strategic messaging. So if you had to like boil it all down to like the key takeaways, how do you think they are?
Well, I think what Lavrov's doing here is laying out Russia's perspective very clearly, highlighting what they perceive as Western aggression and broken promises.
Yeah.
He emphasizes the need to consider those realities on the ground, which is, you know, a phrase that's ripe with ambiguity and potential for misinterpretation.
Yeah.
And while asserting Russia's strength and resolve, he also acknowledges the very, very grave danger of nuclear war.
So it's a complex and unsettling picture.
Yes.
So given all this tension,
do
you think there is a realistic path towards?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it's a long and difficult road, fraught with mistrust and fundamentally different worldviews. But as Lavrov himself acknowledges, the alternative is just too horrific to contemplate.
Yeah.
So finding common ground, however narrow it might be, and building upon those shared interests is really the only way forward.
Sobering thought to leave us with.
It is.
I think understanding these diverse perspectives is so crucial.
Absolutely.
Especially when the stakes are this high.
Absolutely.
So keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning and stay engaged.
Stay engaged.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.